We are awakening together. This is our weekly gathering we hold online. For more information, visit our website, awakening-together.org. We'd love to see you there.
Thank you so much, Marisol. Thank you. And good morning to everybody. It's been a long time. I haven't seen some of you. And so it's really a pleasure to be here, and good afternoon to those who are on my time zone, where it's 3:15 in the afternoon where I am. So I was actually looking at my notes from the last time that I led in a Sunday gathering, and it was actually looked like it was January 2022. So if my notes are marked correctly, so it's a really long time ago, but there was something quite coincidental because I had my notes of the things I shared, and I was like, oh, I've come back to David Whyte, who we're going to be, Inka's very kindly going to read a poem and a reading from him today. But I didn't know it was David Whyte last time I was here, and now I know it's David Whyte. So it's funny how these things work out. So with that, I'm sure you're all keen to just say hello and let us know how you are and what's going on and what the weather's doing. So Marisol, if you could play our opening song, that would be lovely, and we'll all greet each other. Thank you so much, Marisol, for sharing. It always makes me a bit weepy. That's wrong. So I thought I should put, and also it was helpful because I thought, oh gosh, let me get it on gallery view so I can see everyone, and then I'm not staring also just at myself enlarged on a screen, slightly teary-eyed. So it's really nice to see where everyone is, and I love hearing about the weather because it just makes me feel like especially this time of year, the seasons, you really feel the seasons, I feel. If you're in the Northern Hemisphere, well, I suppose you feel them everywhere, but with the fall coming and the fall here and when winter is sort of coming. So I'm very happy birthday, Marge, to you. So, I just wanted to read our statement of purpose. So we are an assembly of equals joined in common purpose, and that is awakening to one true self. Within an appearance of many faiths, many cultures, and many symbols, we seek to discern one truth and to rest in its embrace. So when I was thinking about the core value, I wanted to sort of frame up for today, or have as a foundation for today. I think it was early September or maybe even late August when Rhoda sent out the email asking for ministers to volunteer to lead a Sunday gathering. And I felt called to put my hand up, and thought, as you often do with gatherings, or when you're going to be giving any talk or speech or leading a group or just sharing in the sanctuary, you kind of think, well, I don't really know what I'm going to talk about. I have got a rough idea, but I guess I'll know nearer the time. And actually, since offering to Rhoda to lead today, a lot has happened. And it's been quite a testing period. And over that time, I've really had to face the call to just get very still, and also sort of revisit this sense of person and the sense of identity. And I feel like the only way you can do that, and sometimes you don't really get a choice, is to just be really deeply present. So that's kind of what we're going to focus on today. So I felt like this core value kind of captured that, and I know it's one that we often turn to here, and that is we accept one true self, which is one presence or being, non-dual, without beginning or end, and absolutely changeless. We live this value by practicing letting go of the belief in the individual self as who we are. So I thought that's what I'd like to ruminate on this morning. This notion of really getting intimate on the ways that we are holding on to various identities of ourselves, and becoming deeply present to what's being asked of us. Is it time to drop that? And perhaps what happens if we don't do that? What does that look like for us? So more on that later, but I know we've got quite a few announcements. So Anne, I think you're up first with the announcements, if I can pass to you. Gosh, as so much love and gratitude in this room, I think I'm going to cry. And I haven't been to the retreat centre. And Jane and Peter, I've not met you, but I'm deeply moved by how much love is here for you all. And I'm just so grateful to be here. I wish I was more well, I wish I was in your time zone, or I wish you were in my time zone, should I say. So I think it's time for a first song. And I was just going to sort of mention a bit about this song. It's by Colin Hay and it's called Waiting for My Real Life to Begin. And as I mentioned, today's reading that Inka will share in a moment from David Whyte is a lot about sort of just being very deeply present to the seasons and changes that are happening in your life and when you're being called for an identity to shift. And this particular song is really I mean, it's like Colin Hay is saying, everything's going to be fine. There's a ship coming for me, and I've got a plan. And someone's saying to him, actually, be still and just open your heart and let the love shine in. And he's going, no, that's not it. Here isn't it. It's something else, and that's coming for me. And then everything's going to be amazing. And that's when my real life's going to begin. And he can't quite manage to just listen to this voice. So over to you, Marisol, for this song. Thank you, Marisol. So if you could join me in prayer. Dear God, whatever the word is that we put around that, feeling and knowing and connection in our lives to all that is, thank you for this beautiful life and experience that you have graced us with, for the bitter and the sweet. And help us to be deeply intimate with what is here, to be present and to be alive to the questions that are being asked of us, the conversation that we are being asked to be engaged in. Help us recognize the changes and transformations that we are being invited into, and help us have the courage to say yes to those changes and the changing seasons of our lives. Help us be aware of the identities that we are giving ourselves and when it is time to let that go. And help us cultivate a sense of curiosity, but also great generosity in giving those away fully. Thank you for all your love. We place our trust in you. Amen. So before I hand to Inka for today's reading, I just thought I'd frame up a little. David Whyte is a poet and philosopher, I gather. That's how he's described. I didn't know David Whyte until about 5 weeks ago, perhaps. It turns out I actually did know him because I mentioned something he said in the Sunday gathering back in 2022. I just don't think I knew it was David Whyte at the time I was referencing. But I feel he came along at this right time, and he came along through many messages. So I knew he was meant to arrive. And it's a bit of a story in itself, which I will share briefly, because it might help frame up the reflections on his poem and the reading and provide some context of this rumination for today. So with that, I'd love to invite Inka. It's very kindly offered. Many people kindly offered to read. It was amazing. But Inka, thank you so much for offering to read. And it's a poem by David Whyte called Sometimes. And then actually there's a audio he has. You can get it on Audible or Sounds True. It's like a 5-hour audio called What to Remember When Waking. And there's one particular bit in it which I transcribed and have cut down just for readability, and so just a caveat that I've slightly edited this for Inka to read out today. So thank you so much, Inka. Over to you.
Works so much better with sound, doesn't it? So this is the poem. Sometimes, if you move carefully through the forest, breathing like the ones in the old stories who could cross a shimmering bed of leaves without a sound, you come to a place whose only task is to trouble you with tiny but frightening requests, conceived out of nowhere, but in this place beginning to lead everywhere. Requests to stop what you're doing right now and to stop what you're becoming while you do it. Questions that can make or unmake a life. Questions that have patiently waited for you. Questions that have no right to go away. So David Whyte says, what does the phrase mean? Questions that have no right to go away. I suppose it looks at the way that each of us have certain questions that belong to us. And if they were to go away, we'd be less of ourselves and less in the world. And each of us has particular questions at particular thresholds in our life that we must address. And the question has no right to go away because it's germane to the emancipation of the next level of our life. And the interesting thing about these questions is you can, as a human being, choose to turn away from the question. You can refuse to have the conversation. But when you do that, everything seems to lack energy, as if it has had color and life drained out of it. And it's only when you turn your face back towards the question, do things come alive again? The moment we do this, we're back in the conversation. One of the other qualities about a question which has no right to go away is that it's a conversation that's going to happen with you or without you. So you can choose not to have the conversation, but you will then simply be a recipient of the collateral damage that comes out of that conversation, rather than a participant who may actually share in some of the rewards that lie at the bottom of the whole dynamic. One of the qualities of the poem is this phenomenon of boy crossing territory without making a sound. And as I thought about it after I'd written the piece, one of the truthful aspects of that description is that each of us in our lives is constantly crossing boundaries, unannounced, and finding ourselves in a new dispensation of our existence with no annunciation that the change has actually occurred. Change just begins. For almost all human beings, we actually ignore the first annunciation that summer is over, or that autumn has turned into winter, or that spring is about to move into the effulgence of midsummer. Indeed, most human beings are actually a good few years behind the curve of their own transformation. Most of us have actually not faced up to the threshold we actually find ourselves on and are living out a ghost-like existence. This dynamic is especially true when you have had a portion of your life where things have gone your way and the slow transformation of it into something else is not recognized. It can be quite heartbreaking, a refusal to understand that that time is over, that season is over, and it needs to fall away. And instead of being active participants in its dismantling and reimagining, we have simply been trying to shore it up and keep it alive long after its time on this earth has been numbered. So most people are 3, 4, or 5 years behind the curve of their own transformation. And most of us only catch up with ourselves through some kind of trauma where you lose someone close to you, you're fired from your work, a relationship comes to an end, you are devastated, and you suddenly find yourself looking reality directly in the eyes. And you realize that you have actually been in a certain place for a good few months or a few years, and you simply haven't been able to face it. And many of us, through these traumas, hit present circumstances and present reality with such velocity that we break apart on impact. So, one of the great disciplines of life is simply to know what season it is, to face up to where you are in the curve of your own transformation or events, to recognize that the honeymoon period of a relationship is actually over and has been over for a good few months, for example. And the attempt to keep your old identity alive in the relationship at all costs often keeps you away from a certain intimacy with your partner, with life. We can understand in evolutionary terms how this was incredibly important for our survival, to know what fruits were available, what game was available, what kind of shelter you needed, what kind of clothes you needed to wear in order to be alive and out there in the world and thriving, and not just the victim of circumstances. And there are today still equal parallels in our life. The courageous, generous life is constantly looking to see where you are now and facing up to it. It's interesting to think that when you are on the cusp of adolescence, no one says to you, in the next few years, you're going to have an enormous physiological tide pass through your body, where you're going to grow in all kinds of awkward ways. You're going to be given desires you had no idea human beings could have. You're going to feel distant from your parent, distant from your school system, distant from your society, and distant from yourself. And this is called adolescence. No one tells us exactly what's going to happen. And when you're 21, no one knocks on your door and says, have you realized, by the way, in the midst of all this, that you're going to die one day? And even if someone did turn up, we wouldn't believe them. When you're 51, not only do you have the revelation growing in your bones that you're only here for a short time, but there's also a sneaking suspicion that the rest of creation could be quite relieved to see you go. That your personal individual gift in the world is only one of hundreds of thousands of millions of other gifts in the world. And that if you're not actually living it out, you could be quite superfluous. And you could be quite superfluous anyway, because there's a bigger story of which you are just a part. And a personal individual identity starts to make less sense as you approach the curve of your own disappearance. So where am I in life? What do I have to face up to? What invisible boundaries am I crossing right now that I must articulate to myself and to others in order to live that frontier existence, in order to be in the conversation? Almost always the beginning of the transformation has to do with these tiny but frightening requests. And if we are not used to the constant necessity for cyclical change and movement, we can see them as being irritants, as being something that's annoying us, instead of the first annunciations. It's interesting to start to cultivate a discipline of seeing the change as early in the process as possible, of seeing the seasonal changes and actually gaining a kind of delight in them, just as you would gain a delight in the first bird species of spring, the redwing, blackbirds coming into your garden, annunciating something new and being generously able to give away your old identity.
Thank you so much, Inka. You read that so beautifully and so clearly. Thank you. So there's a few things. It's there's a lot in this. I had to transcribe it so I could read it over and over and over again because there's so much in here. But just some of the things I took some notes on was this idea that, you know, when you slow down and get very quiet, you can then hear what you're being asked to do, to stop what you're doing and stop who you're becoming while you're doing it. And that these questions are just waiting for you. And you probably are aware of them, but perhaps for some reason we're not engaging in a conversation with them. And David Whyte talks a lot in his poems and texts and his audios about life being this conversation, and that you are presented, or we are presented with questions that don't necessarily need an answer, but they require us to sort of stay within the conversation, stay open to them. And often, you know, rather than we want to just answer them very quickly, you know, yeah, no, it's all, you know, I got a plan, it's coming, or I don't need to think about this at the moment, I'm too busy, or I'll get there when I just do XYZ, or yeah, I know about that kind of thing. Instead, just kind of being deeply present to sitting in the question. And he says also, you know, you're really being asked to be engaged. In a piece of We Have Time Later, I'll share, he actually talks about, you know, a lot of people think life is about winning or losing. And I know that this group doesn't, but that actually, you know, maybe on some level, but sometimes we feel that, where he says, actually, life is about being in the conversation, and that's it, and that no one wins and no one loses. But actually, if you can stay in the conversation, it leads to this deeper level of intimacy. So he gives this example of, you know, if you can, I think I redacted it a bit for this reading, but if you recognize that maybe the honeymoon period in your relationship is over, for example, maybe you're now moving into an era you're going to become parents, where he points out that one of you in the relationship is now going to be firmly number two, perhaps even number three, if people put themselves first. And no one tells you that this is coming. But if you can remain really open to what is happening and the transformation that has occurred without you actually probably signing up to it, you can actually have a much deeper relationship with your partner. And that's just one example he gives of that intimacy. But I sort of expand that out, that actually, if you can stay in that conversation, you can really have a deeper level of intimacy of who you really are and what this life really is. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. And he also talks about, like, if you know, if you're not going to engage in that conversation, it's going to get your attention some other way. And that could be some trauma where you end up having to just, you're hit very hard. I think he talks about it as you hit it with a velocity that will break you, really. And that's when you end up looking reality directly in the eyes. And I'm sure every one of us has had some of those experiences. And he describes it as courageous and generous, to be constantly in tune with where you are and what questions you might be ignoring. And this generosity point I'll touch on in a bit. And I think that's really a very special message. He talks about this personal identity being held onto and how that needs to drop away. And then finally, he talks about how we can cultivate that discipline to be in the conversation really at all times, which we might call like listening to guidance, or, you know, being present is another way perhaps of talking about it. And also to gain delight in that in these transformations. You know, when we see for me, when I see the geese flying over, I'm like, oh my God, winter's coming! Like it's autumn, you know, they're off, and you feel like almost a delight, and it's great. But perhaps we don't always feel that way when a certain change is coming, and we can feel it, but maybe we're like, not ready for this, instead of just being really curious about it and then generously giving it away. You know, I think we often hear the story of, you know, trees don't hold on to their leaves forever, they let them go. So those are kind of some of the themes that I wanted to touch on, but I kind of wanted to share, so my personal experience has happened over the past couple of months, and how I'm really still in the middle of contemplating all this, and I might get a bit upset about it, so bear with me, sorry. And some of that is just hormonal, but some of it is not. So essentially, some of you will, who've known me a while, know that over the last 9 years, my partner and I have tried to get pregnant many, many different ways. We've tried everything, Eastern medicine, Western medicine, all kinds of crazy things, thumbs in belly buttons and strange oxygen tanks and God knows what. And it never happened for us. We had one pregnancy test for pregnant for a day, and that was it. And we did IVF and many different things. And it ended up being quite painful in the end, because it's one, you've put your body through a lot of poking and prodding with a lot of strangers in very intimate places. And that alone is enough for a body. But it's also just painful to constantly be in this place of trying. We're your identity becomes very much, we're the couple who's trying for a baby and failing, and it's really hard. So about 4 years ago, I kind of said, I can't do this anymore, let's knock it on the head. And what happened was we just kind of threw ourselves into work, moved back to England. It started a little before the move back, but that was part of the thing that was happening at the time. And instead of just like worked and worked and worked, I have a job that I really enjoy, but it is 70-hour weeks at best. And if I don't do that, then it just becomes sort of unmanageable, really. And my partner is actually the same. It's quite interesting how we both have obviously this thing inside of us that's like, well, we're not going to be parents. We're going to darn well just work ourselves to the bone, and create a different kind of life, and have this purpose or whatever it is that was driving that for us. And that has been really intense. And I don't mind saying that I've done a really good job in this job, and built a big team and raised millions. We're not for profit. I travel around the world, I give speeches, and it's been amazing. But the last, I'd say, probably some point in the middle of last year, I felt like, actually, you know what? Why don't we have one last go at trying for a kid? And I'd read something about donor eggs. So you can have an egg for a woman generously donated, much younger, much more likelihood of success. We thought, well, let's do that. And so we were preparing all year for this moment to happen in September. And it was really interesting how some of my identity was very identified with my career now. So it was actually, I could feel some tension about shifting to potentially being pregnant and a mother. What would that mean? But we planned to do it, and so we did it, and we were very, very lucky that we got pregnant. And so then this whole identity shifts again. Because it's medically assisted, I suppose, you have to take a certain level of hormones to support an IVF, which means your body is really whacked. I mean, I'm sure it is anyway with any normal pregnancy, but certainly when you're being pumped full of hormones, you cannot help but be deeply present with your body. And what's so interesting for me is that, the body is just changing all the time. So you've got to just quickly change with it. You're going along for the ride. Your body's doing what it's doing. So the body at some point was like, you know what, you've had a sweet tooth your entire life. We hate sugar. No longer. That's not what we're going to be. We're going to be looking for peanuts and sardines and all that kind of stuff all the time. And you're just like, okay, I'm aware of this. And you're aware of your body changing and growing, what you can and can't do. Became sort of deeply aware that all of a sudden, if I'm giving a presentation, I can't speak. I'm very breathless. I don't know why. So that becomes like, well, what the hell am I going to do with my job? Because now I can't really can't do public speaking. But also, I didn't sleep. I've always been an amazing sleeper. Now I'm sleeping an hour on, an hour off, an hour on, an hour off. And you have to just adjust. Like you said, like in the poem, you can't just, you're in the conversation all the time and you're on the receiving end. You're literally just going, what can I do here? What can I do? Guidance, which is just really, really, really beautiful. And And, you know, so weeks go by and I can feel there's a real struggle with this sense of like, I can no longer do things I used to be able to do at work. And I'm not going to be able to do them going forward either. So, but I'm not quite ready to change yet, to give up that career woman that I have become. And so there was this, I could see really clearly, there was an identity that wasn't quite ready for the next point. There was like a tension there. And about the week 7-week mark, we had a scan and the heartbeat's great and you see it. And then David Whyte started appearing in my life. Someone pinged me and said, you talked about beautiful questions, like always ask a beautiful question, which is actually what I mentioned in this homily back in January 22. Do you know who said that? And I said, I've no idea. I was quoting Sarah Wilson, but she mentioned she quoted someone else. So I'll find that book and I'll find out who Sarah Wilson was actually quoting. And it was David Whyte. So I wanted to help my friend out. So I looked through David Whyte's stuff and sent her a list of beautiful questions of David Whyte. I thought, oh, this David Whyte guy's great. Poet, philosopher, that's interesting. Maybe there's some beautiful questions I could be asking myself. And then I think it was about that time that maybe I was also thinking about, oh, I should probably read the homily I read last time. And that's when I was like, oh, I mentioned beautiful questions. That's David Whyte again. That's really strange. And now I'm in this place where it's, you know, week 7, 8, and all of a sudden now I'm like, okay, I think I'm ready to start dropping that old identity of a career. And I can feel that what this does is it gives my team room to grow, because now all of a sudden they've got to do everything for me. And so they've all got to step up. So this point on generosity, which I still haven't heard because I haven't yet come to David Whyte's audio, was really sort of sitting with me like, oh, actually, what is happening here? I'm having to just give away all the stuff I've built up and give it to other people to lead. And one of those was I was supposed to fly to Colombia and do some very big keynotes and meetings, and I wasn't going to be able to go, and so I had to give that away, what I've been building up probably the last 2 years of my career to do. I had to give it away, and I don't think I was particularly generous about it in my heart. I mean, I had to give away, but I was like, I don't want to do this. I really want to go, but I can't go because I'm pregnant. It's early pregnancy. But around this time, I had to tell everyone because they had to know why I wasn't flying for work. And everyone's so supportive, and everyone wants people who've never talked to me about their children or their family or how they got pregnant or how they kept pregnant or whatever, their morning sickness, suddenly wants to talk to me. And all of a sudden, I'm now in a new club. My identity has shifted. I'm now in the You're Pregnant club and You're going to be a mom club. And now all my girlfriends who have not talked to me for 9 years about how happy they've been with children now feel that they're safe to have all those conversations with me. And I'm like, oh my God, I have a new identity and I love it. I feel like I am whole. Like it's just amazing. It was like a club I always knew I wanted to join, but I just didn't think I'd ever join it. It was so beautiful, and everyone was so supportive. It was like a level of intimacy just opened up with everyone, because now there's conversations we can have that I think maybe they weren't having with me. And then around week 9, I came across this audio and the whole audio, and that's where things started to click for me. Like, actually handing all my stuff off to my team is an act of generosity. And while I wasn't doing it out of generosity, it actually, I can get on board with giving away an entire identity because it feels better. And again, it's deepened my relationship with my whole team. So I'm listening to this audio, and obviously he's talking about all these different themes and this threshold I feel like I've crossed now because I'm moving into a different part of my life. And unfortunately, just like several days later, I because I was so in tune with my body, when you're taking hormones, your body can't do what it would naturally do if the baby didn't make it. So you've kind of got to be very, very present. And I was very present, and I could tell that something was not right just because I started wanting chocolate again. And I was getting a bit more sleep, and I thought, It's not right. And I was remembering this audio. So I was listening to the audio all through the night because I wasn't sleeping. And I felt like I need to be very present. I could wait to week 12 when they give you a scan. But I feel like I have to be honest with the conversation I'm being invited into right now, which is this has not worked. So, and not only has it not worked, but you've lost the baby. So I sat up one night when I just knew, and I really felt like I knew. And I waited for Bill to wake up, and I said to him, "We're going to go for a scan." And we went for a scan, and they said, "I'm sorry, the heartbeat has stopped." And it probably stopped a couple of weeks ago, actually, but your hormones have taken some time to let you know, and your body's taken you some time to let you know. And because you're still taking hormones, you haven't naturally been able to really, your body hasn't been able to process it. So I had to have a surgery the day everyone flew to Colombia, which was irrelevant to me by that stage. But I did feel terrible because I'd made people take time out of their personal life to fly on my behalf to take my meetings. And they all knew, and there I was. And there are a million things, I'm sure you can imagine. It was deeply, deeply sad, and the grief you feel about losing even a very young fetus was one thing. But it's been a couple of weeks now. And what's left with is that, it's been a roller coaster of identities. Like there I am, like we're people who can't get pregnant for years and years and years, and then we're people who have careers, and then we're people who are going to have a baby, and now I'm going to be a mom, and everyone's talking to me about it. And I've realized in my head I don't want to work those hours, and I don't want this kind of push on the career. This is what I want. And now both are gone, because I'm left not going to be a mother, and now I don't want to work these hours. So the career thing has gone too. So this audio has been so helpful because it's just sitting with it all in the questions and in the conversation, which is, this is what's happened. Like there's no avoiding it. This is the conversation you have to have. And that conversation is really just listening. It's not, I can't even tell you the questions, it's like a million things, but I wrote a couple of things down here. And that's one of the things, and I think it's, it's so fresh. I was a bit like, I'm not sure you want to talk about this today, but that's what's here. Is that perhaps this is a question that has been waiting for me for years. Perhaps this question is really perhaps, I guess what I'm trying to get my thoughts together is that if I'm not going to be a mother, I guess what maybe I did was say, well, at least you'll have a purposeful career. And my job is very lovely, and we play a tiny, tiny, tiny part in global nature restoration. So it feels, it's got that lure of, oh, this is purposeful. And I think the question I'm being invited into, or the conversation I'm being invited into, is why do I feel that I have to have some purpose? Why is it, if you're not a mom, it's your job? Otherwise, because I can see there's a belief of like, what use am I? If I'm not contributing in some big way through a job, or if I'm not parenting or caring for a family in some way. Perhaps that small but frightening request to look at that exact thing is something I've just been avoiding for years, because it is so terrifying. So now we are in a place where we have one embryo left from the donor. We had two, so that will happen next year. But I'm very much in a, if it doesn't happen, like, what are you going to do? Because the the horse has bolted on the career. I already made the shift in my head, and I can feel it's very easy just to go back, but it's gone. But then this new way might not happen either. And we've explored it, all sorts of adoption and fostering, and it's just not worked out, and I don't think it's going to. So this really is kind of like towards the end of this whole period for us, which is fascinating. I mean, it's terrifying and upsetting, but it's also I feel I'm sure you know, when you have these things happen, you sense like a much closer relationship to life. Like you're operating right in the moment, because what else can you do? If you're not present, I suppose you can just avoid it, but sometimes when you have something happen to you, you know what it's like, you are broken open a bit. And I don't know if you're just a bit more open, and so you're more willing to be present with the conversation that is happening, with the questions that are being asked of you, or whether you don't have the mental strength to bat them away. And so they're just alive for you in that moment, perhaps. And so you're just there, and there's something actually quite beautiful, and I don't know if you had this experience where you're in it, and there's part of you that just thinks, I need to stay in this spot because this feels like the crucible of something, of like, as he mentions in the text, like your next level of your transformation. It feels like it's here, and part of you doesn't want to just like zone out and go back to work or fill your day with busy things. You feel like, you know what, I gotta get under some covers, or go and sit in a wood, or just something where I can kind of sit in it and just see what arises. And as I say, he says in some of his other work, it's not about the answers. It's really not. It's just about sitting with the questions that are coming up that you've been ignoring for a while. So this kind of attachment to identity has been really alive the past couple of months for me, and so I was just really grateful to share this with you. Some of the other points he makes, and just to caption, there's another bit of his book called The Three Marriages I thought I'd just read a little bit from. So he's saying, sometimes we're just not aware of the things that are how things are changing for us, and how can we become deeply present to those. And I think it's courage is one, and also just slowing down and being still, and that's quite hard at times, but anyway, we can do that, I think is important. Being aware of the attachment to our identities and how they're shifting and what that means to us, and staying in a conversation around those. And then he talks about how, upset and this kind of a trauma, and I feel like sometimes that word is a little overused, but you know what I mean, like something big happens to you, can really sharpen your focus to be deeply present. Like we know this, and it gives you this forced stopping. But he says, why do we have to wait for that? So he says, it's a very short line from this book, The Three Marriages. He says, the big question is, can you cultivate a daily discipline that simply doesn't need all this trauma in order to open the door and keep it open? And I think that's such a wonderful question to be asked, and I guess a beautiful question, of how do you keep it open, to this point of like, when you feel it's something very alive here, and I don't want to close this door, I need to like just sit in it. How do you sort of maintain that instead of like deeply clinging on to this piece, like, oh, the juice is here and I'm gonna miss it. Like, how do you just like relax into it and just say, this door's gonna stay open for me, in good times and in bad? That constant conversation. And then there was this other part he talks about here, which is about the pursuit of the self. So David Whyte also talks about how in all his work, how the human nature is suffering, like Buddha, Buddhism teaches. And I've always found that a bit depressing, that message, like, oh God, someone talking about how all of our life is suffering. But his point is that if you can get yourself really comfortable with the fact that the human experience is one of feeling like you don't quite belong, feeling like of loss, of huge loss, like either you're losing everyone or they're losing you, like that is unavoidable. He says if you can just accept that human being, that's the human being, and that you don't need to win or lose, you just stay in that conversation, then that's the essence of, that's the goal. So he says, the pursuit of the self is also the pursuit of that part of us that is untouched by our successes and accomplishments. He says the marriages of relationship and work may bring us tangible outer gains, wonderful sex at times, children, house, money, recognition, the ability to help others. But the marriage with the self is the pursuit of a way of being that is so alive to all the phenomena of existence that it stops distinguishing so much between what is winning and what is losing. And he says the pursuit of what he calls the super self, which is the big S self, is difficult exactly because we cannot imagine what it would be like beyond winning and losing. In pursuit of the self, we cannot get there from here. We can only get there to begin with by stopping. And he says stopping is not passive. It allows us to look at the world as if we've seen it for the first time. And it allows us it stops us from keeping things alive beyond their appointed time. And it makes us realize that everything is going to disappear, including ourselves. And so we don't have to keep acting like we're immortal. And we can begin to really have a conversation with the questions that we've been invited to have a conversation with. Around the time that David Whyte came in, I'm realizing I'm going over. Right, so I'm going to stop here, but I was just going to sort of end this by saying that that there's David Brooks talks about your resume virtues and your eulogy virtues, and specifically around how we end up cultivating so much of our resume virtues in life, like, got a job, became a parent, moved here, did this, bought a house, paid the mortgage, etc. Instead of what really makes us happy is our eulogy virtues, which is, how generous was I? Did I stay in the conversation? Was I kind? Was I patient? And I always think that sort of chimes quite well with this idea of that it's not about who you are and the identity that you have. It's a much deeper question that we're being called to, as I know we all are. So I've gone on a bit. So there's a song I'd like to share, and I think it's pretty obvious from the title what it's about, and it's called "Who Am I?" Thank you, Marisol. I think probably the most beautiful question that we are ever called to ask is "Who am I?" Which I think if we listen, like get really slow, that is the question we're all asked. And as Melissa said, it's certainly not your resume or your stories. I've left very little time for sharing, and I'm so sorry. I had in my mind we were 10 minutes different to where we are. So I wonder if I know that there's time to come together at 11:30 Eastern, but if anyone had anything that they wanted to share now. Anne?
I just wanted to thank you. I wanted to thank you for the demonstration. The demonstration of what it means just to lean right in and stay right there. I love you. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Inka?
I want to say the same thing as Anne just expressed, but most of all, thank you for the courage. And I hope that in being in community today, that in some way we can reach out to you, and you can feel our love, my love in particular, of course. And thank you.
Thank you, Inka. Thank you. If there's no one else, I've got a very short song. I think it's 2 minutes long, and it's a bit more upbeat. And, but it's a reminder just to really stop and have a look around and be present. So I feel always so blessed when I connect back with this group, and I hope, having come to the conclusion that I will not be working these kinds of hours anymore, that I can spend a bit more time on what's really important to me. And it's certainly the love and teachings cultivated within this community. So thank you so much for letting me share today. I recognized it was deeply personal, and thank you for being present to that. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your Sunday. I'll be here for some of the afternoon. Thanks.
You've been watching our online gathering. It happens weekly on Sundays at 10:15 a.m. Eastern Time. To join us live in the sanctuary, visit our website, awakening-together.org. You'll want to click on Online Sanctuary in the main menu, and then in the drop-down menu, look for How to Enter the Sanctuary. Right there at the top of the page is a clickable link. We'd love to see you in the sanctuary and join with you in fellowship. Thank you again for watching. Also, please know that if you'd like to stay connected via the Awakening Together channel here on YouTube, you can subscribe and hit the bell for more notifications. We hope to see you in the sanctuary.